Good evening. My name is Rabbi Moshe Brisky. I'm the director of Chabad of the Kaneo and the dean of the Kaneo Jewish Academy. In addition to lectures and encounters with renowned speakers and scholars from around the world, such as the one we're hosting this evening, each semester, the Academy offers a full schedule of classes and study groups and workshops covering a broad range of Jewish topics and areas of Torah scholarship. Now, for obvious reasons, our programming is being offered fully online this semester, making all learning opportunities accessible to those outside the Conejo Valley area as well. So to view our 2020 fall schedule, please visit jewishacademy.com. Tonight, we're pleased to join with congregation-based Betzalel of Los Angeles in presenting a very special Zoom discussion with world-renowned lawyer, constitutional scholar, media commentator, author, lecturer, and advocate of civil liberties, defender of Israel, and champion of truth, the illustrious Professor Alan Dershowitz. I'd like to extend our special thanks to Ms. Jennifer Ellis for all of her efforts in putting this evening together. In a few moments, Rabbi Moshe Levin, the spiritual leader of Beis Betzalel, will set the stage for tonight's discussion by posing some opening questions to our guest speaker. And thereafter, we will invite some questions from our viewing audience as well, which you're welcome to post using the chat feature on the Zoom webinar platform. And we'll try to get to as many as possible. For any Jew, or for any American for that matter, who's tuned in to issues of the day, Professor Dershowitz really needs no formal introduction. Nevertheless, if you would permit me, there are a few reflections I would like to share on a personal level. For one thing, Alan Dershowitz is a longtime dear friend and enthusiast of Chabad. He has a warm relationship with the Lubavitcher Rebbe, whom I know he respected deeply and corresponded and visited with over the years. And over the past 2 years, I personally have had the opportunity to coordinate with Mr. Dershowitz on a certain matter affecting a Jewish husband and father who was unfairly targeted. And I've been deeply touched by his efforts to undo an injustice, motivated, as by his own words, by Rahmanis for a family in crisis. Indeed, compassion and justice and truth are clearly the central passions of his life. I would also like to express how proud I am whenever I read Alan Dershowitz's writings or see his appearances on the world stage or various media outlets in which he so brilliantly and forcefully makes the case for the Jewish people and for the state of Israel. He's never timid, nor is he intimidated. He says things exactly the way they are. And I think that few, if any, can match his command of the facts, his ability to articulate the truth in an illuminating and compelling way, and of course, his phenomenal debating and lawyering skills. A large percentage of the more than 35 books Professor Dershowitz has authored over the years deal with Israel and issues of vital concern to the Jewish people. And an autographed copy of his latest book, Defending Israel, The Story of My Relationship with My Most Challenging Client, is also being made available this evening. If you'd like to visit Jewish Academy after the lecture, you can make your order there. The topic of tonight's talk is Chazak, standing strong. And while the discussion is likely to take us along many fascinating paths drawing upon Professor Dershowitz's experience in many arenas, the main focus will be on the challenges of standing firmly and proudly with our Jewish principles and ideals, combating anti-Semitism wherever it rears its ugly head, especially on college campuses, and showing our consistent and unwavering support for Israel, even as these values continue to be under constant assault, either in overt and explicit ways or in thinly disguised ways. The truth is that these issues should unite all of us of all backgrounds and all political parties and persuasions. These are not Democrat or Republican issues. They are Jewish survival issues. Nobody understands and exemplifies the sense of priorities better than Alan Dershowitz. He puts his soul before his politics. I want to tell you that last year, Rosh Hashanah, in the wake of a series of horrific attacks against individual Jews and mass shootings at synagogues and Jewish establishments, I gave my high holiday sermon on the subject of anti-Semitism, which historian Robert Wistrich identifies as the longest hate. And one of the more powerful articles I came across while doing research for that sermon was penned by none other than tonight's guest speaker, an article which I quoted extensively from, with attribution, I might add. I don't want to get sued by the world's best lawyer. The article was titled, "Are Jews Too Powerful?" And the article addressed the vile comments on the part of certain members of Congress about Jewish money and influence by turning the issue on its head. And in this article, I'll just read a few sentences from it. "When I hear that Jews are too powerful," he wrote, "my response is, we are not powerful enough. When I hear that AIPAC is too influential a lobby, I say it must become even more influential. When I hear that Jews contribute too much money to support pro-Israel causes, I say we must contribute more." And on the article went. The fact is that Jews have contributed immensely to American values, lifestyle, and success. You take any arena vital to the human condition, to science, to medicine, to religious, to economics, to technology, and we have had disproportionately a positive impact. So as Alan writes, we have earned the right to speak up and act as first-class citizens. You know, it was great sermon material, Alan, and a good lead into tonight's conversation.
Thank you.
With that, I'd like to turn the mic over to my colleague, Rabbi Moshe Levin, who will be leading the questions of Professor Alan Dershowitz this evening. Rabbi Levin.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Brisky. The title, as you mentioned tonight, is Chazak, One Sheep Among 70 Wolves. And the Talmud is referring to, of course, our position and how the only reason we're able to survive in the language of the Talmud is because there is a great shepherd. And the great shepherd, of course, is the one who's protected us for all time. But God also asks us to do our part. And as Ray Brisky so demonstrated about you, Alan, how much you've done in this regard, I wanted to ask you, before we get into any specific questions, I want to ask a personal question. What is it about your upbringing that made you such a passionate defender of Israel and human rights?
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me. As both rabbis have indicated, I am a strong supporter of Chabad. I work daily with Aleph on behalf of Jews who are imprisoned around the world. I do all that work pro bono, and I hope to continue to do it for many years to come as I do my work on behalf of Israel. I was so lucky to grow up I was born in Williamsburg in Brooklyn, and I grew up in Borough Park as a modern Orthodox Jew, although some of my family members were what they called themselves Malachim. They were Misnagdim, Malachim, not Hasidim, but equally learned and very, very religious. My family was very Orthodox. I went to Yeshiva Eitz Chaim. First, I went to Yeshiva Torah Semes, and I learned Yiddish. And then my parents switched me to a Hebrew school, Eitz Chaim, and then I went to Yeshiva University High School. I was not a particularly good student at Yeshiva because I tended to be a fighter, and I fought with my teachers, including my rabbis. But when I was 13 years old, I got a message. And the message was, what was my bar mitzvah sedra? My bar mitzvah sedra was shoftim, tzedek, tzedek, tirdof. The rules of being an advocate for justice. And I took that as a message. I took that as a calling. And all of my life, I believed in defending the underdog. My father was the oldest of a large family. He had an older brother who was very sickly. So my father was functionally the oldest of 7. And his job was to protect his younger siblings. And he was the one who would go out and fight the bullies that were anti-Semitic. And my father taught me how to box at a very early age and taught me always to defend myself and to speak up on behalf of Jewish values. My mother, my grandparents helped to found the Yeshiva Torah Vodaas in Brooklyn and the Young Israel of Brooklyn, the first Young Israel anywhere in the world. And in fact, my parents met each other because both of their fathers were active in both Torah Vodaas and Young Israel. So I come from a family of some degree of yichus, and I didn't serve their interests very well when I was a yeshiva student. But I became a very, very good student after I left yeshiva and went to Brooklyn College and then Yale Law School. For the first few decades of my professional life, certainly the first decade, Israel didn't really need much of a defense, and Jewish values didn't need much of a defense. We were living in a golden age. Everybody liked Israel. Everybody supported Jews. We were seeing the end of discrimination. And so I devoted much of my life to defending the rights of other people. Lo ta'amod al dam re'acha. I did not stand idly by the blood of my neighbors. And I went down south and I fought for civil rights and I fought against the death penalty and I fought against discrimination against African-American people in the criminal justice system. But after the 1967 war and starting in the early 1970s, when I saw the academic community begin to turn against Israel, I switched my priorities. I continue to defend people of every background, but I prioritized my defense to Jewish values and to values in support of Israel. Some of the highlights of my life were meeting the great Rabbi. I met him with Justice Goldberg when he was running for governor of New York. I then met him when I was fighting for Soviet Jewry, and the Rebbe and I had different approaches to Soviet Jewry. I believed in lawsuits and demonstrations, and the Rebbe believed in behind-the-scenes diplomacy, and we met. And we had a wonderful conversation, and I left the conversation feeling that the Rebbe was doing an enormous amount of good, and that I hoped he would believe that maybe I was helping his diplomacy behind the scenes by being a little bit more overt and going to the Soviet Union on a number of occasions and representing people like Anatoly Sharansky and others who were fighting for their freedom and for their right to emigrate to Israel. So my upbringing was crucial. I grew up right after the Holocaust. I was born in 1938. I'm 82 years old. Much of my family was destroyed in the Holocaust. If you're in the Los Angeles area, many of you probably know my cousin Tzvi Dershowitz, who was the emeritus rabbi at Temple Sinai.
I think he's on with us tonight. He's listening.
Oh, I hope so. He's a wonderful, wonderful man, a great rabbi, great scholar, and just a real mensch. And his family was living in Brno, Czechoslovakia. And my grandfather found out about his cousins in Brno, Czechoslovakia, and created affidavits for all of them to come to America. He went to all the shuls in the neighborhood, all the houses in the neighborhood. And he said, you have a basement, it's now a shul. You need a rabbi, you need a rebbitzin, you need a shechet, you need a moil, you need somebody to take care of your mikveh. They said, mikveh, we don't have a mikveh. You have a mikveh. Send us an affidavit. And 27, 28, Rabbi Dershowitz will know the exact number, were saved. And there's a fascinating story. One of them was left behind. Her name was Ann Dershowitz, related. And she was stuck in Przemysl, Poland, because she was studying the violin. And so my grandfather wouldn't give up on her. And he sent his oldest unmarried son, my uncle Menashe, rabbi, to the belly of the beast, to Poland, to find this young woman and marry her on his American passport and bring her back. And so they had a fake wedding, as I understand the story, and they got on the boat together, and on the boat they fell in love. And when they got back to America, they had a real chasana, and they lived together for 50 years. And that's the story of my family. So I have a lot to live up to. I have a great family. My uncle Zachariah Dorshov, changed his name from Dershowitz to Dorshov when he made Aliyah to Israel, is writing a chronicle of my whole family, going back to, as far as we can trace it, probably the middle of the 19th century. And I'm looking forward to reading that book. And I hope that I will be able to live up to the tradition that they started so many years ago. So thank you for asking me about my background and my heritage. You know, philosophy is autobiography. And you can't understand a person's philosophy without understanding their life. So now that you've had a little bit of an understanding of my life and my background, we can get to the more philosophical and practical questions.
Wow, that is really fascinating. Thank you for sharing that. I wanted to ask you specifically, you mentioned about how academia started turning against Israel in 1967. I wanted to ask you about the environment and atmosphere on college campuses. How has it changed in the 65 years since you attended college? And I could ask you about yeshivas as well, I guess, because you were a yeshiva student too.
I was a bandit in the yeshiva. I can't tell you much about how yeshivas have changed. I think they've gotten much, much better. I can tell you one of the things I'm most proud of is when I became a professor at Harvard, I went to see the dean of admissions. And I said, you know, I noticed that the entering class, it's wonderful, but you don't have any kids from Jewish high schools. Oh, are Jewish high schools academically decent? I said, yes, some of them are really fantastic. At the time, Ramaz was a terrific school in New York, and some of the other schools, and Yeshiva University High School. And I pushed him very hard to interview yeshiva students. And I think I helped start the process by which today Harvard College, Columbia College, Princeton, Yale, many of these wonderful elite schools have yeshiva graduates. In fact, now at law schools, Harvard Law School and Yale Law School and Columbia, we have even started to take some people who didn't graduate secular colleges, who just were Iluyim, brilliant students of Talmud, and they've come to places like Harvard and Yale Law School and done extraordinarily well, because what could be better training for being a lawyer than being a Talmudic scholar of great renown? I remember one of my great privileges was I used to accompany Harav Soloveitchik in the last years of his life. He would come down on Thursdays to teach at Yeshiva University. He lived in Brookline, I lived nearby, and I would pick him up and take him on the airplane, and we would have great conversations and talk. So the relationship between, you know, Talmudic logic and legal logic is very clear and very close. But what's going on college campuses today is a shanda, is a disaster. When I taught at Harvard for 50 years, I think I can say categorically, I never told a student what to think about anything. I never tried to use the classroom or the podium as a propaganda tool. My job was not to teach the students what to think, it was to teach them how to think. It was to teach them methodology, to teach them ethics, to teach them the right approaches to law. But I never tried to turn students who were conservative into liberals or liberals into conservatives. I would never express my personal views on any matter in the classroom. Today, the classroom has become a vehicle for propaganda. Students are graded down if they say anything positive about Israel or about Jewish values. Today, Jews are regarded as part of the white privilege, and Zionists are regarded as racists on campus today. And campuses are dangerous places for committed Jews. Now, you know, you can be a Jewish socialist, you can be a Jewish PLO supporter, that's okay, but you can't be a Jewish Zionist, you can't be a Jewish Chabad person, you can't be a Jew who takes his Jewish values seriously and expect to have an easy time on many college campuses today. But I have to give enormous credit to the young people who are standing up against this. Students at UCLA, students at University of Southern California, at Berkeley, at Stanford, at Columbia, who are visible and who are standing up against their professors, against their deans, against sometimes even the presidents of the university. These are our future leaders, men and women, people like Barry Weiss, who's a young woman who graduated Columbia and quit the New York Times when she saw that the New York Times was a hostile environment, literally a hostile environment for a liberal Jewish Zionist like Barry. I used to be the most frequent op-ed writer of any lawyer in America for the New York Times. I had more op-eds than any other lawyer. Today, the New York Times will not publish an op-ed by me, certainly not about Israel or about Jewish values. And so we're seeing changes on college campuses, but the changes on college campuses are beginning to reflect themselves in the news and editorial offices of the New York Times, in law firms, in businesses, in the House of Representatives, and who knows, soon maybe in the presidency. We're not talking about politics tonight, so I'm not talking about the current election. I'm talking about 20 years from now, when today's college students become the future leaders of America, and I'm very concerned. And that's why we need chazak. We need to be strong. We need to stand up. We need to educate our students in high school, even maybe in elementary school, on how to fight back, how to use facts, how to use information, how to use advocacy against those who would slander and defame Israel and the Jewish people. So this is a perfect setting and occasion, and the topic of tonight's conversation couldn't be more relevant on what's going on college campuses today.
You know, Alan, I had the good fortune of hearing you speak when you were in Los Angeles last in February.
Right.
And I have to say that it was refreshing, not because of what you said necessarily only, but also because you were so forthright of everything, all your opinions, and although it's so incongruous with the the local thinking in many ways, of many of it. And I wanted to ask you, for those listening tonight who attend college in unfriendly waters, would you tell them that hiding their Jewishness or their patriotism to Israel and trying to fit in would lessen the anti-Semitism that they experience, or they need to be the Rambo fearless leader or of patriotism to Israel to be respected? What would you advise these college students who are in unfriendly waters?
Well, they have to stand up. They'll be more respected if they stand up for their rights. And remember that you have a lot of support. You have support from Chabad on campus. Another one of the proudest things I did is I was the first faculty advisor for the first Chabad on campus when Hershey Zarki came up to Harvard and wanted to found Chabad at Harvard. And people laughed at him. Chabad at Harvard? Why would Harvard be interested in people with beards and Hasidim? That's not Harvard. I said, it is Harvard. I said, I have only a couple of suggestions for you, Hershey. One, don't try to be smarter than the professors. We have enough people here appealing to the brains. You have to appeal to the neshama, to the soul, to the heart. You have to get below the head and to the real part of the soul of the Jewish students here. And Hershey and Chabad at Harvard did such a phenomenal job that now there are Chabads on virtually every college campus anywhere in the world, and Chabad has to be commended for that. So you have support. You have organizations like Stand With Us. You have organizations like APAC on campus and other organizations like Chabad and Hillel. So you have people behind you. You have me behind you. You have Barry Weiss behind you. You have people you know will speak up for you. You're not alone out there. And please, please have the courage of your convictions. Nobody will respect you if you try to hide your Jewishness, if you try to hide your values. You know, the reason I wrote the case for Israel is a young student came over to me during the Aseret Yemei Tshuva and the 10 days of repentance and said, Professor Dershowitz, I need you to give me tshuva, to forgive me. I said, I don't even know you. Why should I give you tshuva? He said, I've done something terrible. It's not that I've done it, it's what I haven't done. He said, I went to Ramaz High School. I went to camp, a Jewish camp. I went to Israel on my gap year. I know a lot about Israel, but I am afraid to stand up and speak on college in classes, in the bull sessions, in the dining room. And I said, why? He said, because I won't be popular. Nobody will go out with me. So I started a campaign, support Israel, date a Zionist tonight. Well, that may have helped a couple of Zionists on the campus. But I decided at that point to write my book, The Case for Israel, because I wanted to give the students a weapon, to give them answers, and to make them proud of their Jewish heritage. Look, no country in the history of the world, no country in the history of the world. Last week we read Bereshit. I will go back to Bereshit. No country from the history of the world has ever contributed more in 72 years to humanity than Israel has, medically, scientifically, economically, politically, philosophically, literature, you name it. I challenge anybody to name a country that has done more for humanity in 72 years. You can't. Name any country faced with threats comparable to Israel that has ever had a better record of human rights, higher compliance with the rule of law, more concern with enemy civilians, taught how to fight terrorism legitimately without honorably, the way the Torah tells you how you fight wars. And so I'm proud to be a Zionist. I'm proud to be a supporter of Israel. I'm proud to be a supporter of Jewish values, and we have to instill that pride in people instead of making them cowards. I understand the cowardice. It's hard to resist peer pressure. It's even harder to resist pressure from faculty members. You gotta do it. You gotta do it not only for the sake of Am Yisrael, Klal Yisrael, but you have to do it for your own sake, because you won't be able to live with yourself if you hide your identity. You should be very proud. I'm no longer the Orthodox Jew I was when I grew up. I don't wear a kippah. When I was in high school, I wore a kippah. Even when I played basketball, I wore a kippah. But when I go to places like France, I wear a kippah. I wear a kippah because I want to show the people of France that I'm not afraid to show my Judaism, to wear it on my head. And I will wear my kippah as a symbol of the lack of fear and a willingness to stand up to bigotry.
Your work on Chabad of Campus is really known and impactful, and especially considering that you were there in the beginning of Chabad at Harvard. You reminded me when I was a yeshiva student in Yale University. In New Haven. I did some outreach in Yale University before there was a Chabad presence there. I remember one day, it was right before Passover. I was giving out matzah before Passover. There was one very tall professor. I asked him, "Are you Jewish? Would you like a matzah?" And he bends down, he whispers in my ear, and he says, "Kofer be'ikar," which means I deny it all. And as you said, it's not with the mind. We reach, soul to soul. Words that come from the heart enter the heart, and deep down, we're all believers, children of believers. And I want to ask you this question.
Story, though. I have a story to match your story. So I was getting an award some years ago when my mother, Shalom, was still alive, and I was getting an award along with General Colin Powell. And so I brought my mother, as I always did. Anytime I got any kind of an award or I spoke, she would always come. And my mother goes over to General Powell. My mother wasn't so tall, and General Powell is very tall and very elegant and very stately. And my mother says, "General Powell, there's a rumor in Borough Park that you speak a little Yiddish." And it was, he had worked in a furniture store in Harlem owned by a Jew. And Powell stands up very starkly and says, "Mrs. Dershowitz, I hate to disappoint you, but the rumor is not true. I really don't speak Yiddish." And then he leans over and says, "Epis a bissel." And so he knew at least a few words of Yiddish, and he was very proud of that.
Okay, I want to ask you a very broad question, and I want you to please break it down, because there are a lot of people all over the United States, friends of mine, who are all talking about America disintegrating and it's time to leave America. And why shouldn't we learn from the Jews before the Holocaust who didn't leave Europe? How come we can't tell the signs that we see of antisemitism? Isn't now the time to depart and move away and go to somewhere else to protect ourselves? And I want you to break down what you see, sure, and the details of is there a difference? Is there not a difference? And
it's a great question. It's a great question. Look, if the option were moving to Mars or to the moon, by the way, if we ever got to Mars, I'd expect to be greeted by a Chabad rabbi who would be there before me. But there's no two countries in the world better for Jews than the United States and Israel. By the way, you read Haaretz, as I do every day, and you think people are saying we have to leave Israel. Look what's going on. It's terrible. Netanyahu is this, and so is this, and the COVID here, and we have enemies. It's never been better for Israel. What Israel has done in the last few years diplomatically with the Gulf countries, I have played a very tiny role in helping facilitate that, which I really can't get into in detail, but I've had the honor of working with the White House on the peace plan, etc. But the United States is in a golden age for Jews today. Just a little autobiographical vignette. I have to brag a little to tell this story and make it make sense. I was a terrible student in elementary school and high school, but I was a terrific student at Yale Law School. I was first in the class at Yale Law School. I was editor-in-chief of the Yale Law Journal, and I had been selected to be a Supreme Court law clerk. That's like the trifecta. That's like being the number one.
Good writers have gaiva. All good writers have gaiva.
Right, but no, that would be like being the number one draft choice of the NBA. The difference is I applied to 32 Wall Street law firms with all of those credibilities, and I got turned down by every single one of them. Wow. Not a single Wall Street law firm would hire me despite being first in my class, editor-in-chief, etc. Because I was an Eastern European Jew. I was the son of poor parents who didn't go to college. I had from their point of view, I had no yichus. From our point of view, maybe I did. So that was 1961, 1962. 25 years later, my son graduated Yale Law School. He got 32 out of 32 offers. Everybody wanted him. It had changed dramatically. The civil rights movement was very good for Jews, and we no longer suffer that kind of discrimination. Law firms today Sullivan and Cromwell, which wouldn't hire a Jew back in my day, now has a chassid as its managing partner who wears a chassidish hat and has a minyan. Many of the big law firms now have kosher kitchens and minions. Everything has changed. It's far, far better. By the way, when you hear complaints from other communities, it is far, far better in America today for African Americans. It is far, far better for gay and lesbian Americans. It is better today for all Americans than it was in the past. People just don't appreciate it because they have no sense of history. I was earlier this evening listening to Barry Weiss. She was giving a speech, and she was talking about the Eitz Chaim, the Tree of Life synagogue in Pittsburgh, which of course was the same scene of mass murder of Jews. And she said the only silver lining, and there are very few silver linings to an event like that, the only silver lining is that it was not a pogrom. People shouldn't analogize it to a pogrom. A pogrom was when the police join in and the neighbors join in to kill the Jews, like the pogrom in Kishinev and other places. Here, everybody sided with the Jews. Here, the police were on the Jews' side. Every public official, everybody condemned the act. And yes, you're going to get individuals who engage in terrible, terrible actions, but the community supports the Jews. The only place Jews aren't supported today are on college campuses, and we have to fight that battle. But no, leaving America would be a dreadful mistake. Where would you go? France? England? Where would you go? Greece? Where would you go? Italy? No. Go back to Russia? Go back to Poland? I recently went to Poland with my wife and my daughter. We had a commemoration at the Jagiellonian University of the Nuremberg trials. And it was a wonderful event. And the people of Poland were so friendly. You couldn't imagine what their history had been in the past when you go to a place like Krakow today. But America has been great for Jews, and we have to keep it great in a lot of different ways. But the most important way is by showing strength, by showing that we have the right to speak up. We should use our economic power, our political power, our educational power, our moral power to support and help Jewish communities. Look, there are poor Jews. There's poverty in the Jewish community in some parts of the United States, and we have to all stand behind them and make sure that no Jew goes hungry. No Jew is discriminating against Chaverim Kol Yisrael. We have to stand together. We have to be one country, and we can't split apart. We know the stories from the Talmud about what happens when you have sinui and when you have division. And one of the reasons we don't have division today, one of the reasons we have division today is that we're not facing any major crises. Israel is not in existential danger. The last times we got together, really, and were one community, were in the 67 and 73 wars, when Israel's very existence was endangered. The Soviet Jewry movement, when there were more than 1 million Jews who were being held captive. We united. Today, there isn't a unifying force. I think there should be. I think what's going on college campuses should unify the Jewish community. And I'm hoping that events like the one you're holding tonight will make us all understand we have differences. On a week from Tuesday, some people are going to vote one way, some people are going to vote another way. What's more important is that we're all Americans. We're all going to vote. We're Jews. We stand together. We want to see bipartisan support for Israel. We want to see bipartisan support. We may have differences in how we look at the world, and we do have differences, and we've become more divided. The world has become more divided. The United States has become more divided in the last decade than ever before, but the Jewish community must stick together when it comes to important issues. Now, here's another issue that divides us, and it may divide us here tonight. I have an article that I just wrote this week to my fellow Jews in Borough Park in Williamsburg. As I said, I was born in Williamsburg and I grew up in Borough Park. And I'm on the side of the Jewish community when they say there's discrimination against them and how the COVID rules are applied. There shouldn't be different rules for a Jewish wedding on the one hand and for a Black Lives Matter demonstration on the other hand. You should have a single standard. I'm on their side when it comes to some of the rhetoric that's been directed against Orthodox Jews. But What disappoints me is that the leaders of the Jewish community, some of them, have not done enough for pikuach nefesh. Remember what the Bible says. I have placed before you the choice of life and death. Choose life. Ubacharta v'chayim. Choose life. That has been so central to Judaism. And my message to my friends who I love in Borough Park and in Williamsburg is, please wear masks. There's nothing in the halacha that says you have to have 10,000 people at a wedding. You don't even need a rabbi for a wedding under Jewish law. There are very few things that you need. You need a minyan. So use your common sense, a little bit of seichel. Be apart, 6 feet apart. Wear masks. Put pikuach nefesh in front of custom. I'm not asking you to put pikuach nefesh in front of halacha, but in front of custom, put it there. And I would hope that common sense would prevail. So that's an issue that has divided some of the communities in Brooklyn from some of the more secular Jews. And I want to end that division by saying I'm on the side of the communities in Brooklyn legally and politically. But in terms of medicine, I think you have to listen to the public health doctors. You have to make sure that you emphasize what the Rambam emphasized. The Rambam was not only a great rabbi, he was a great doctor. He understood, you read all through Vayikra, there's all kinds of prohibitions on having people who have communicable diseases remain in the community and contagious. So our tradition is very much a tradition of emphasizing health, emphasizing life. The Talmud says, he who saves a single human life, it's as if they saved the world. Everybody knows that part of it. And they forget the second part. He who needlessly takes a human life, it is as if they have destroyed the whole world. And so we have to put life ahead of custom during a time of crisis. We've always adapted customs to the crises the Jewish communities have faced over the years. We have to do that today as well.
So you like to see from Jewish leaders in Brooklyn to ask, in addition to what they're doing towards protecting their rights, to also encourage their congregants to wear masks and social distancing.
Right. And what I'm saying is the answer to inequality, and they're right, there is inequality. The answer to inequality is not loosening up on Jewish communal gatherings, it's tightening up on the secular gatherings. Don't allow people to have demonstrations where they're close together. Don't elevate demonstrations over Jewish customs. Treat them exactly, have objective standards. No matter where you are, just if you have to be 6 feet apart, you have to wear a mask. We can have the same standards for everybody. Jews should not accept a double standard for their religious observances and their communal observances, but prioritize health. That's my message.
Do you think that the increase in Muslims in the United States will change things for Jews?
No, I don't think so. First of all, we can't generalize. Not every Muslim is like Ilhan Omar. She is a bigot, she's an anti-Semite, and she should not be in Congress. And the Democrats shouldn't have her as part of their coalition, and nobody should accept her as a legitimate part of the American democratic scene. She has lost all credibility when she talked about the Benjamins and made other statements, and her support for Farrakhan and other kinds of things. But when I was at Harvard, I would go and celebrate the end of the meal at the end of the day of Ramadan. I would have meals with my Muslim students, and there many Muslim students are willing to be supportive of Israel. Look what's going on today in the Middle East. Look what's going on, Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates. These are all Muslims and Arabs. Before long, I think the Sudan. I hope within the next year, the most important one, Saudi Arabia. So at a time when Jews and Muslims are having common cause against, in this case, other Muslims, Iran and others who would destroy the Sunni Arab communities, we can't look upon our Muslim neighbors as enemies. We have to try to build bridges to them. Many Muslims came and helped the Jews when there was that killing at the Tree of Life synagogue, and we would do the same if, God forbid, a mosque was blown up. What do you think the Accords were called when Israel made peace with the United Arab Emirates,
I
the
love that.
Abrahamic
I
Accord.
love that. It's unbelievable.
I know. It's Abraham was the father of the Jewish people, but also the father of Ishmael. And so, we can work together. We have more in common.
Okay, there are some questions people are sending in. I want to encourage everyone who hasn't sent the question. We'll try to get to everyone's question. But before we get to everyone else's question, I also want to ask you one personal question.
Sure.
As you mentioned, you had a personal relationship with the Rebbe. You had an audience with the Rebbe, I understand. Can you please tell us a little bit about that audience with the Rebbe?
Well, I had several, and I had some exchanges of correspondence with the Rebbe. And, you walked into that little office. You think if you're going to see the great Lubavitcher. Oh, let me tell you about my first time I ever met the Lubavitcher Rebbe. He had just become the Lubavitcher Rebbe. It must have been either the fall of 1951 or the spring of 1952. I went to Yeshiva University High School in Crown Heights. It was just about a mile maybe away from where the Rebbe's house was on Eastern Parkway. And my best friend in high school was Tzvi Groner, whose uncle was Rabbi Groner. And one day, Tzvi said to me, my uncle, Rabbi Groner, asked us to come over and we had a long lunch hour that day. So we walked over and we had a lunch. And we were sitting and talking, and this man came out. We didn't know who he was. And he introduced himself. He didn't call himself the Lubavitcher Rabbi. He just introduced himself by name, and then asked me what Gemara I was learning. And it was either Baba Kama or Baba Basra, I don't remember, one of the Babas. And he asked me a few questions. And so I had a bechina from the Rebbe. I don't know whether I passed it or failed it, but that was my first 5-minute meeting with him before I knew really who he was. Then the first time I really met him as the Rebbe was when Arthur Goldberg ran for governor of New York in 1970. And Arthur Goldberg asked me to accompany him to his meeting with the Rebbe. And so I spent an hour with Arthur Goldberg and the Rebbe in the Rebbe's study. And then I met him another time during the Soviet Jewry times. That was probably maybe 76 or 77. And then I had an exchange of correspondence with him. What happened is for his, I think maybe 80th birthday, and may have been 75th, one of his important birthdays, they decided to give a big dinner in his honor in Washington, D.C., and honor a number of senators. And one of the people he wanted to honor was the senator from Mississippi. And the senator from Mississippi in those days was not a particularly righteous man, we thought. He was a segregationist, and he didn't support civil rights or civil liberties. And so I wrote a very polite letter to the Rebbe saying, you know how much I admire you, you know how much I respect you, you know how much I think your judgment is wonderful. I just wonder why you would have picked this particular senator from Mississippi to honor. And he wrote me back this wonderful letter. And I think
Jesse Helms.
And it's in the archives, I think, of the Chabad. He wrote me back this letter saying, essentially, when we honor in Chabad, we don't honor for the past, we honor in order to influence the future. And please write me again in a couple of years and see whether or not this honor has had any impact. Sure enough, Jesse Helms became the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee. He became a strong supporter of Israel, a strong supporter of Jewish values. I never again questioned the Rebbe's judgment, believe me.
Wow. That is a powerful, wow. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
Okay, I see some questions have come up over here. Here we go, 1 second. Someone is asking about fighting hate in colleges. Is it incumbent upon Jews who support colleges to stop doing that in order to try to sway the colleges away from anti-Semitism?
It's a great question. Remember, colleges and universities are not just the current student body or the current faculty. Harvard University is older than the state of Massachusetts. It goes back to 1632 or something like that. It has a long tradition. It will be in existence when our grandchildren and great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren. And so Harvard, Yale, Princeton, UCLA, USC, Stanford, these are institutions that are beyond the 4-year students that are there now. And they include alumni. and they include contributors. And right now, the schools are far too influenced by the current faculty and the current student body. So I would encourage alumni.
Just before you continue, just want to say, if people are asking to ask questions on the chat, just write the actual question you have. They just type the question to the chat. Sorry, please continue.
So I would urge alumni and contributors to condition their contributions on making sure that Jews are treated equally and Zionists are treated equally. I was honored to speak at the White House when President Trump unveiled his executive order cutting off federal funding to any university that treated Jews and Zionists differently from other protected groups. And I think it was a very important thing to do. It was too bad we needed it. We shouldn't have had to need it, but we did need it. And I'm sure whoever the next president is, whoever is elected next 2 weeks, and whoever is elected 8 years and 12 years from now, that executive order will remain in force. So I think we should use whatever pressures we have, if it's a state university, through legislation, not to deny academic freedom, but to protect academic freedom. Because today, Jewish students who support Israel and identify strongly as Jews are being denied their academic freedom. And academic freedom doesn't only belong to the faculty, it belongs to the students as well.
Right, Risky, did you also receive some questions before that you wanted to share? You're muted, we can't hear you. Right, Risky, are you trying to speak because we...
Unmute. There we go. Okay, is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. Some of the questions that are being asked is concerning anti-Semitism. Do you see it as something that is a crisis today in America or controllable in America? Is it something that is just growing and growing, or do you see it really that it is under control? However, every once in a while it spikes up.
There are different kinds of anti-Semitism. When I was growing up, anti-Semitism was easy to spot. You couldn't move to certain neighborhoods. You couldn't move into co-ops in Manhattan. You couldn't get approval of the co-op boards. Your kids couldn't get into medical school. There were quotas on college campuses. It was obvious what anti-Semitism was. It came from the top down. Today, anti-Semitism comes mostly from the bottom up, from the dregs of society. So one form of anti-Semitism is what we saw in Charlottesville, when people said we will not be replaced by Jews, and when neo-Nazis and Ku Klux Klansmen marched. That's the shooting of the Eitz Chaim synagogue. That's one form of anti-Semitism. And nobody supports that. That's a tiny fraction of people who believe in that. That's a law enforcement issue. We are controlling that. We are winning that fight. That's easy. It's painful. Every time a Jew is killed, it's painful, but it's under control. That's not the biggest problem today. The biggest problem today is anti-Semitism from the hard left, anti-Semitism on college campuses, anti-Semitism that makes Jewish kids feel uncomfortable with their Judaism. A third form of anti-Semitism, and here again, I don't want to generalize, comes from limited elements of the Islamic anti-Israel community. You see polls show that there's still a considerable amount of anti-Jewish hatred that are taught in some mosques around the country. Look, tragically, you may get some anti-Muslim hatred being taught by some extremists among rabbis. We all have our own extremists, and we have to fight our own extremists from within. And I'm not making any comparisons here, but those are three different forms of anti-Semitism. The anti-Semitism from the hard right is under control. We will deal with that. The anti-Semitism among Muslims is limited in its influence in the United States. It has more pervasive influence in France and other places. And I think that's going to disappear as Israel makes peace more and more with Arab countries. It's the hard left anti-Semitism that's the most frightening and the most influential, and the one that we haven't figured out a way of dealing with, and that's spreading and getting much more serious.
If I can just follow up, and
Sure.
I'm going to try very hard that this doesn't turn into a political discussion.
Sure.
But how did that happen? We're the party of Scoop Jackson and the party of so many great friends of Israel, Senator Kennedy and his brothers. how did it happen, this sudden change? And again, we're trying to keep this a very non-political evening.
It's a great question. Look, when I was growing up, it was bipartisan. Yeah, you had Ted Kennedy and you had Jacob Javits, Republican, Democrat. They all supported Israel. People forget that Israel's greatest supporter was Robert Kennedy. People don't remember that Robert Kennedy went to Israel and covered the War of Independence. He was a staunch Zionist. I worked very closely with Ted Kennedy when he was a senator. There couldn't have been a better friend of Israel, as you say, Scoop Jackson, Pat Moynihan, so many people. Hubert Humphrey was in Israel one day and planes flew overhead. And he turned to the prime minister and he said, "Are they ours or theirs?" By ours, he meant Israelis. I mean, and things have changed.
And we can't forget President Truman.
Right, yeah, but things have changed. The major change was brought about by a Catholic priest named the Reverend Berrigan, one of the great villains of modern history, just not so long ago died. He wrote in 1973, I think, right after the Yom Kippur War, he called Israel a criminal Jewish community, blamed American Jews, said we were terrible people. That was picked up by the Noam Chomskys of the world, the Norman Finkelsteins of the world, the Bill Kunslers of the world, and of course the Communist Party of Russia, the Soviet Union, turned against Israel after the '67 war. And remember, communists used to like Israel. They supported Israel. Czechoslovakia, under communism, gave Israel its first weapons to fight the War of Independence. That stopped when communists turned against Israel. When communists turned against Israel, the American left turned against Israel. When the American left turned against Israel, the Vietnam War veterans or the opponents of the Vietnam War began to become teachers at universities and had an enormous amount of influence. And so that influence has been growing. Fortunately, it hasn't really affected what most Americans feel. The vast majority of Americans, Democrat or Republican, are very supportive of Israel, but not on college campuses. That's where the priorities are. That's where we have to fight the battle. And I have to tell you, one of the reasons I am fighting so hard is, some of you may know that a few years ago, I was falsely accused of a sexual contact with a woman I never met, never heard of. And I finally found emails from her admitting she never met me, admitting she never heard of me, a tape recording by her own lawyer admitting that she was wrong, a tape recording by a best friend, an investigation by the former head of the FBI. I was completely and totally exonerated, never met this person, never heard of her. But as the result of the accusation, I have been kept off college campuses because some feminists say, oh, he's been accused, he must be guilty. I wrote a book about it, which you can get free on Kindle, called Guilt by Accusation. One of the reasons I'm fighting so hard is I'm not worried about my reputation. I know I did nothing wrong. Since the day I met Jeffrey Epstein, yes, I was his lawyer, but since the day I met him, I have had sexual contact with one woman, my wife of 35 years. I've never done anything wrong in my private life. I'm not worried about that. What I'm worried about is my voice on Israel on college campuses is being stifled, which is why I'm fighting back, why I'm suing them, why I'm suing the lawyers, why I'm asking for investigations of everybody, because I need my voice to be restored, not for my sake. I'm 82 years old. I could retire. I need it to be restored because I have to go back on college campuses and fight the good fight and tell the truth and correct all the lies and errors that we're hearing today on college campuses. So I know I've gotten a lot of support in my battle from members of the Jewish community. I want to express my appreciation for your support, and I hope you'll support what continue. I want to look you in the eye and tell you, you will have nothing to be embarrassed about or ashamed of. I did absolutely nothing wrong. My accusers know that. Everybody knows it. But in the world we live in the Me Too world we live in, my voice has been stifled. I've been canceled by not only university campuses. Would you believe I've been canceled by the 92nd Street Y, the major forum? When my book, which you have a copy of, Defending Israel, came out, I wanted to speak at the 92nd Street Y, as I have for the last 25 years. I was the second most frequent speaker after Elie Wiesel. But the 92nd Street Y told my agent, we know he didn't do it. We know he didn't do anything wrong, but we have to cancel him because we don't want trouble from any of the Me Too people. So I can't speak at the 92nd Street Y. I can't speak on college campuses. I've been canceled in another number of other forums, and I need my voice to be restored so that I can continue to defend Israel.
And thank you very much for addressing that. I want to also ask you one more question. With
Sure.
hours getting winding up, I want to give voice to a question that I think many in my community here in Los Angeles who are in the entertainment industry have. There's a question from this gentleman from Berkeley. He's asking, please address the problems and possible solutions regarding Jews in the entertainment industry and media.
Well, you have these idiots in the entertainment industry, people like the Jewish guy who just made the film American Pickle, what's his name? And the other guy, Ruffalo. I mean, all these really ignoramuses who are famous because they're actors, but they don't know what they're talking about. And they have turned very, very anti-Israel. In the old days, the film industry, Hollywood was very pro-Israel. Who was Israel's biggest supporters? Frank Sinatra, Bob Hope, all the great names in Hollywood were supportive of Israel and supportive of Jewish values. Today, some of the biggest stars, I don't think any of them are particularly good actors. The guy I was thinking of before is Rogan, I think his name is, turned against Israel. And then you get people, even some Jewish writers and others. So it is a problem in Hollywood, and it's a problem. Oliver Stone has turned against Israel. And these are not informed, educated critics of particular Israeli policies. They're just knee-jerk, left-wing, anti-Israel people. And they have to be responded to. They have influence. Fortunately, there are Hollywood people who are very supportive of Israel. There's a group in Hollywood that's very supportive of Israel as well. So, but we have to correct the lies of famous actors and actresses. And who was it? A Jewish actress put Farrakhan's speech on the web praising it. I mean, she didn't know what she was doing. She was just a fool and an ignoramus. But ignoramuses and fools who are stars in Hollywood have disproportionate influence on young people's attitudes. So we have to address that as well.
So how would you best think of a solution for that? There are a lot of budding, producers who feel like they can't, share what they're doing, their writings, their work because of their political views and their pride in Israel.
Well, it's hard. We have to make sure we fight back. We have to make sure that producers, remember, the producers are the ones who put the money up for the films. And there are a lot of producers who are going to be very pro-Israel. And those producers have to put their money where their ideology is and not support films that discriminate against Israel, discriminate against Jews, or present a false picture. Again, to go back to what I said in the beginning, we have earned our power. Hollywood was a Jewish invention. It was invented because Thomas Edison was an anti-Semite and didn't allow Jews to be in the film industry he tried to build in New Jersey. When's the last time a film was made in New Jersey? So the Jews from Second Avenue moved to Hollywood and created the film industry. We should now become victims of an industry that our people helped to create. We have to fight back everywhere where the fights can take place. We have to defend Jewish values in Israel in every forum.
Alan, if I may just throw in, I saw a photo of you holding a Torah that the Aleph Institute wrote in your honor.
Right.
And on the mantle, it had the words Sedek Zedek Tirdof, which you opened with as part of your bar mitzvah portion. It has been part of your life every single moment of your existence, because that was your portion of your birth and your bar mitzvah. Right. I want to bless you indeed that Sedek Zedek Tirdof, you should always find justice. And in all of your work on behalf of Klal Yisrael, on behalf of Eretz Yisrael, on behalf of humanity, you should only find success and tremendous hatzlacha.
Well, thank you. That's a wonderful blessing. And I take it very seriously because Sedek Zedek, the writers ask, why does Hashem repeat the word Sedek? And there are so many possible interpretations. I'll give you mine. Mine is that you have to have justice, tzedek, for the real victims of crime, for women who have been abused, for real victims of crime, they deserve tzedek. But you also need tzedek for those who are falsely accused. And I will not give up until I achieve both tzedek and tzedek, because I take seriously my parsha. My bar mitzvah was, I think my 69th anniversary of my bar mitzvah was only a couple of weeks ago. And I was up here on Martha's Vineyard with my family, and I laned the portion, Shoftim v'shotrim titein lecha b'chol shi'arecha. So, I can still do a little of that.
Wow.
And I still remember my portion. And, I was a young choir boy. I sang in the choirs of Ber Lachagi and Moshe Kusevitsky. And so I still, when we are in our house isolated, I lead the services. I'm the chazan, I'm the Baal Koreh, I'm the Baal Tekiah, and I give the drash. So although I was never, when I graduated high school, my rabbi called me, and Rabbi Zurif, and said, you got a good mouth on you, but you don't have a Yiddish cup. You're not smart. He said, so we got to figure out a profession or a trade for you that you can use your mouth a lot, but not your brain. He said, so I have two ideas for you. One, you could be a conservative rabbi. That was for him the biggest insult in the world. Or you could be a lawyer. So I was never smart enough to be a conservative rabbi or a rabbi at all. So I had to choose to be a lawyer. I think my grandmother would have preferred for me to be a rabbi, but I think of my rabbinical background, my family's rabbinical background, my training in yeshiva has been a very, very important part of my success as a lawyer. So I want to express my appreciation for my Jewish heritage, for everything.
I'm sure they're all having nachas from you.
Yeah, thank you.
If I may share with you one story in the spirit of Chazak, in the spirit of your recent birthday. I think if your parsha was Shoftim, then it wasn't so long ago. I think you're 82, Knai Nahara, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Sein gesund. There was a senator in Canada, I think his name is Irv Gerstein. He called up the rabbi of the Kotel, and he asked him if he can come to Canada to celebrate his 80th birthday. And the rabbi of the Kotel apologized. He couldn't come. He was very busy. He couldn't come. But he said to Irv, he said, you're celebrating your birthday. Is there any blessing that you need in honor of your birthday that I could give you from the Kotel, from Jerusalem? So Mr. Gerstein says, actually, I just started a newspaper in China, and I need a blessing for this new endeavor. So the rabbi said, I don't know how to give a blessing for an 80-year-old who's starting a newspaper company. I never heard of such a thing. How do you have the wherewithal to start a newspaper company at 80 years old? So he responded, he said, listen, every birthday I have is hard for me. The hardest birthdays I have are the round ones, 30, 40, 50, those are the worst. When I turned, I think it was 50, I was so depressed, I couldn't get out of bed. And my wife was nudging me that there's a great grand rabbi in New York, the Lubavitcher Rebbe. He's very intelligent. You should speak to him, and he'll give you advice of just speak to him. So Irv says, I told my wife, when he needs advice, tell him to call me. But a Yiddish, Baruch Hashem, a Jewish wife knows how to give her husband the message the way he needs to hear it. And he went on a plane to New York, and he went to the Rebbe. When he got to the Rebbe, he gave the Rebbe a pretext of why he was there. The Rebbe read through it. The Rebbe said, what's bothering you? So he said, I haven't accomplished anything in my life. I'm already this age. I haven't done anything. So the Rebbe asked him if he reads the Bible. So he says, I read the Bible, but not much. The Rebbe said, do you know who the most famous person in the Bible is? He says, Moses. He says, do you know how old Moses was when he began his career?
Right.
He didn't know. The Rebbe said Moses was 80 years old. And let me ask you, the Rebbe says, why do you think Moses took the responsibility of all the Jewish people at the age of 80? How could he do that? All the Jewish people, 80 years old, how could he take that such great responsibility in such a feeble age? And the Rebbe answered his own question. The Rebbe said, because there are two kinds of questions people ask. There are questions that young people ask and questions old people ask. Old people ask the question, what have I done? Young people ask the question, what needs to get done? And Moses was a young person. And that's why he was able to take the responsibility at the age of 80 years old. So Irv told the Rabbi the Kotel, he said, that's what carried me from 50 to 60 to 70 to 80. What needs to get done? And I hear from you loud and clear that this is what's on your mind. What has to get done?
I have an agenda. I have a lot of years that I need to get because I have a lot of things I want to do. Who was it who once said, I want to die young at the age of 95? We all wish each other many, many years of activity and productive life. I want to devote the rest of my life to the kinds of Jewish causes and causes that have been a part of my life for so long. And I hope that Hashem will give me the strength to continue to do that.
Until 120. Thank you so much, Alan. Thank you all out there for joining us. Thank you for those watching on Zoom, on YouTube, on Facebook. Thank you through the whole world that's watching us. Have a very good evening. Alan, God bless you.
Thank you. God bless you.